All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, we want to send all of you our thank yous for your tremendous support. Again, people are slowly finding out about who we are and what we do. And as we stated before, we do this because we love this as we continue to build our listening army to take over the world. Well. Had a bit of a shake-up in the world of professional sports, more specifically the sport of professional boxing, and more importantly, a version of the heavyweight championship of the world. Something that we did not see coming. Definitely a shocker. I know people on Twitter who are more of European fans picked the challenger to win this fight, but we had an upset in a fight between reigning champion Anthony Joshua and the cruiserweight champion, or the former cruiserweight champion, Oleksandr Usyk from the Ukraine. So going into this fight, we didn't really do a preview because he figured Joshua should be the guy moving up in weight class, moving up in the heavyweight division. So we figured that it should be an easy fight with Joshua being a naturally larger opponent. Watching Usyk fight Derek Chisora, yeah, he fought well, but nothing that would lead me to believe that he'd be able to wrestle the title away from Anthony Joshua. But how wrong we were. But really going to this fight, Anthony Joshua, really, there were some questions where he was supposed to fight Tyson Fury, but then that fight was canceled because the judges had ruled that Deontay Wilder should get the rematches while the fight is coming October the 9th. That was really scheduled for July 21st. So going into this fight, Anthony Joshua had TKO wins. He was in April of 2017 against Vladimir Klitschko. It was a fight that really put him on the map. A TKO in the 11th round in a classic fight, which both fighters were dropped. Unanimous decision against Joseph Parker, March of 2018. September 2008, a TKO in the 7th round against Alexander Povetkin. June 19th, a TKO loss in the 7th round, and probably the second or third biggest upset in heavyweight championship history when he lost to Andy Ruiz Jr. Right at the ship, regained his title December 7th, 2019 against one Andy Ruiz Jr. So going to this fight, he was 24-1 against Oleksandr Usyk, who was 18-0. And again, a cruiserweight champion. Notable victories was over Tony Bellew. If you guys don't know who Tony Bellew is, go watch the first Creed movie. He was Pretty Ricky Conlan, who Michael B. Jordan's character fought in the Creed movie at the end. If you remember the premise of the movie, the champion, Ricky Conlan, was supposed to be, he had some jail time that was coming up, and he wanted to cash in before he went to jail. They found out that Adonis Creed, who was a young heavyweight kind of making his way up through the ranks, had bloodline to the late Apollo Creed, trained by Rocky Balboa, so that's how he got the fight. So that's who Tony Bellew was. And he had Usyk fought Derek Chisora, probably his second foray into the heavyweight division, won a unanimous decision. Very close fight, did enough to win. Again, there's still question marks whether he can fight Anthony Joshua. And ladies and gentlemen, if you watch that fight, Usyk came out, and I thought won the first 3 rounds of that fight. From mixing up his attack, using excellent upper body movement that left to right, becoming shifty, moving side to side, wasn't really backing up, and I thought was landing the showier punches. He was outworking Anthony Joshua, mixing that left hand, the straight left to the head, as well as mixing up his body attack and really getting out of the way of the return. Watching the Chisora fight, I felt that Usyk definitely had a lot of good foot movement, very nimble on his feet, and he is a boxer. Ironically, there were times where he outboxed Joshua in this fight, and you can make an argument he is the better pure boxer between the two. Now, maybe the fact that he's naturally a smaller guy, which means he's much more nimble on his feet, while Joshua, who is a heavyweight, is a little bit more, he'll lumber around the ring as as compared to a guy who was a smaller fighter. But ironically, they both achieved gold medals in the 2012 Olympics, with Joshua winning the super heavyweight division and Usyk winning the heavyweight division. So it is something to be said about that. Now, going to the first 3 rounds of that fight, I had Usyk winning all 3 rounds. And again, by getting off the showier punches, the harder punches, landing that straight left, mixing the attack to the body, even kind of buzzed Anthony Joshua, I felt in the 3rd round. So the first 3 rounds clearly were swept by Usyk. Joshua, to me, then made a comeback the 4th, 5th, I would say maybe the 4th round, definitely the 5th and the 6th round, where the commentators had that fight even going into the 7th round. Traded wins back and forth. Now, what Usyk pulled ahead in that fight was in the 10th, 11th, and 12th round. Now, Joshua clearly had his moments in that fight, so let's not take it away, or let's not take that away from him. He clearly had his moments in that fight where, especially in that 4th, 5th, and 6th round, he was starting to time Usyk a little bit. I felt he was throwing his right hand as he was bending over to the left. He was firing that right hand as Usyk was moving side to side, so he was starting to kind of pot shot Usyk and was kind of landing his punches. You know, you had Usyk who clearly was developing cuts on his face, but where I give Usyk credit, and even though it appeared in that 9th round that he was starting to get tired because he wasn't really, if he'll make Joshua miss in the early rounds, he was making Joshua pay for it. There was times where Joshua was missing his punches in the 9th round and Usyk just wasn't firing. Well, there were times in those early rounds, as soon as Joshua landed a punch, you had Usyk will come right back and land a punch. So that was pretty good. I thought in the early rounds that Usyk, he did a good job of kind of feinting Anthony Joshua. That's how he was able to catch him with the straight left upstairs. Of course, being a southpaw, I can understand how that works. But in the 10th, 11th, and 12th round, I thought Usyk really stepped on the gas pedal, where Joshua claimed to have better stamina or was supposed to be the more in-shape fighter. And I thought Usyk did a wonderful job at stepping up the attack, landing those hard punches. And folks, if you look at that 12th round, Anthony Joshua was about to be up out of there. Staggered on his feet. He was out of it. If there was one more round, he probably would have got knocked out. And the saddest thing to see at the end of that fight was seeing Joshua in his corner, mouth wide open, being tended to by his corner. He looked like a beaten fighter. No questions asked. He looked like a totally beaten fighter. And on a personal note, hearing Roy Jones doing commentary, I thoroughly enjoyed hearing that. We have talked about Roy Jones before on our program, one of the best fighters of the 90s. Roy Jones really has an eye for boxing. I thought was an excellent play-by-play, or whatever term you use, color commentator for boxing on HBO. And he sees little things, and this is why I respect pro athletes, because they can talk about things that even fans can't see, or unless you really train the sport. And it was something, for instance, where a guy who actually participated, and especially at his highest level, where he was talking about how Usyk was feinting Anthony Joshua, and Joshua just wasn't seeing the feint. He was not reacting to the feint. So those little things that fighters see. And I thought hearing Roy Jones do his commentary, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I hope they get Roy Jones back to commentating boxing, because it really is a pleasure to hear him talk about these matches. So as Joshua is sitting on his stool, you have Roy Jones saying, I don't like the way how that looks, because out of every boxing match, when the fight goes to the final bell, you see both fighters walking around the ring with their arms raised. You see cornermen picking their fighters up, kind of playing to the crowd, more importantly, playing to the judges. And Roy Jones said, even though clearly Joshua lost the 12th round, I mean, it was no questions asked, but, you know, any little bit helps when you're scoring a fight. And the look on Joshua's face, beaten, battered, right eye swollen, bloody nose, I mean, physically beaten, while you have Usyk walking around the ring, raising his arms in the sky, playing to the crowd. At one point, you even see Usyk walk up to Joshua's corner. Joshua couldn't even get off the stool to give the man a hug. So that really wasn't a good look. But we want to say congratulations to Oleksandr Usyk becoming a version of the heavyweight champion of the world. And because of that, he is now the WBA, the IBF, the WBO, and the IBO heavyweight champion heavyweight champion of the world. So we give him all the credit. Now, where does this lead us? Where does this lead us? Now, we got a big fight coming up October the 9th, and we'll be doing our review. If you haven't heard the preview, by all means, check it out. Now, this goes Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. Whoever wins that fight should fight the winner. Should fight Usyk. And that will unify the heavyweight champion of the world, or the heavyweight championship of the world. So now, I think the fact that you just had this major upset in boxing, I think that's going to put more eyes on the Fury-Tyson fight, on the Fury-Wilder fight. Because now there's been a shakeup in boxing. People, even casual fans, are like, well, wait a minute, there was a shakeup in the heavyweight division, and Fury and Wilder fight. We might want to catch this fight because we want to see who's going to fight this brand new champion. So we're definitely going to be closer to a unified champion. So I think it's going to put more eyes on the Wilder Fury fight. Now, let this be a lesson to boxers. When the time comes to set up a major fight, stop playing around. When the time it is right to strike, when the iron is hot, please do so. Stop playing politics, stop playing money, and make the fight happen. Now, let's say Deontay Wilder wins that fight. Let's say Anthony Joshua beats Usyk in a rematch, and we'll talk about a rematch in a second. Does that fight carry the same weight as it did back in 2018, 2019? I don't think it does, because Fury was undefeated. Wilder was undefeated. So was Joshua. Wilder now had that bad loss against Fury, and Joshua has 2 pretty bad losses. So that fight, if that fight were to be made, let's say next year or a year from now, it doesn't have the same luster. Again, now you can blame Wilder, you can blame Joshua why that fight never took place. I tend to give more of the blame to Anthony Joshua. So think of how big that fight would have been made about 3 years ago. And it's funny what some years made. Let's go to Joshua and Tyson Fury. If that fight is made, both of them were undefeated, you would have had possibly the biggest heavyweight match ever. They kept playing around, dilly-dallying around. Wilder steps in, wins a court battle to now have the rematch. Folks, I'm going to say in terms of being top-level heavyweight championship fights, that luster is no longer there. The shine is gone. The bloom is off the rose. When you have a chance to make a quality fight or the best fight that can be made, stop playing around and make those fights. Don't just think, well, I'm going to keep winning on my side and I'm going to keep fighting and he's going to keep fighting and one day we'll get into the ring. It doesn't work that way because boxing is I'm not going to say is as unpredictable because, of course, you have favorites and you have the underdog. But yes, it is a sport where anything can happen. And think if those fights were made against Wilder, against Fury, how much money they would have generated. But now, since Joshua has lost twice, yes, some of that pizzazz, some of the anticipation is lost. And that's sad. So again, ladies and gentlemen, especially fighters, if you have a chance to make a fight, that's the best thing that can be made. Stop playing around and make the fight because you never know what can happen. Talking to you, Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford Jr. Errol Spence Jr. and Terrence Crawford. Just saying. Make these fights when they're meant to be made because, again, another fight wasted, 2 fights wasted down the drain. Now let's go to the rematch. Anthony Joshua has a contractually obligated rematch that he plans to exercise within 30 days. Now let's talk about the rematch. Nothing that we saw in that fight wouldn't lead us to believe that Joshua couldn't win the rematch. Because believe it or not, we picked Ruiz to win the rematch versus Anthony Joshua for the simple fact that he had faster hands than Joshua and he knocked Joshua out. And he had punching power that Joshua really couldn't handle. We didn't bank on Andy Ruiz coming in flagrantly out of shape and under condition for that fight. Now let's go to Usyk. Can Joshua turn the tide? Yes, it's totally possible because, yes, he did have his moments in that fight. I don't know what happened to his stamina, especially those last rounds. And to me, he looked a little off with his punches. I mean, he looked, even though he landed his shots here and there, and maybe it had to do with Usyk's defense, but I thought a lot of Joshua's shots was a little bit sloppy. He claims, as he told the commentators, he didn't hit the focus pads, he only hit the heavy bag. When heavy bags are stationary, he felt it would be better for him in this fight. Clearly, that didn't work because to me, he looked a little bit off with his punches. He looked a little bit slow with his punches. And you would think, fighting a naturally smaller opponent, you would actually put some power on your punch. And he was more pot-shotting, I guess trying to hit anything, but he was more pot-shotting Usyk than I thought he should have been loading up on punches to wear Usyk down. So, does he have a chance to win? Absolutely. And of course, when they have the rematch, we'll do our preview for that rematch. But Joshua was just beaten by a busier fighter. And again, I don't know what happened in that last round. Him almost being knocked out. That's a conditioning issue. I've always questioned Joshua's chin ever since the Andy Ruiz fight. So it's something where he fought like a small guy, pot-shotting. He made his adjustment, but I thought he was just outworked. Hit with straight lefts, overhand lefts, hit with straight lefts to the body, and was really taking to school. And I thought had his moments. I thought Usyk looked tired. That's when I thought that Joshua really should have pressed the issue with just making punches land, but maybe that could have affected his stamina. So that's another thing too, if stamina is an issue. And somebody on Twitter did mention that stamina is possibly an issue with Anthony Joshua because, again, the way he looked spent in that corner after that last round was kind of telling. So these are the things that make boxing great. I give these guys all the credit in the world. Once again, congratulations to the new version of the heavyweight champion of the world, Oleksandr Usyk. All eyes will be on Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. We want the winner of that fight to fight Usyk to crown an undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And of course, that winner will probably fight either whoever, Joshua, and I'm sure they'll find opponents, but this is why fights are made when it's supposed to be made. Stop playing around and make these fights. But we wanted to give our little 2 cents. We had to do our review of another upset. So again, Anthony Joshua has been part of 2 of the biggest upsets in heavyweight boxing history. Number 1, probably the biggest upset, I would say, is obviously Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson. I think that kind of goes without saying. You can throw in there, I'm going to put Andy Ruiz over Anthony Joshua, then Hasim Rahman over Lennox Lewis. And speaking of Joshua, now here's where hopefully his mental state comes into play. Because he's lost 2 fights. One fight he was knocked out, and another fight he was clearly beaten. However, we're not going to write him off just yet, and here's why. The great Lennox Lewis, who we stated on our broadcast is one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time, and I think had he been an American-born heavyweight, I think people would view him as such. Lost 2 fights. The first one against Oliver McCall, he was knocked out, and the aforementioned fight against Hasim Rahman. And we're talking 7 years in between, so I think the McCall fight was 94, I believe, and the Rahman fight was 2001, so we're talking about 7 years in between. Lewis is still regarded as one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time. Vladimir Klitschko, who is older brother Vitaly Klitschko from Kiev, Ukraine, like Usyk, was in attendance. Vladimir Klitschko, who was the heir apparent to the heavyweight championship of the world after Lennox Lewis, lost to Corey Sanders in a totally embarrassing, second round knockout? I think that too was one of the biggest heavyweight upsets because nobody ever heard of Corey Sanders. Then, as he rights the ship, gets Emmanuel Stewart in his corner, loses to unheralded Layman Brewster. And I'm going to say that fight was in 2005-ish, I believe. I have to go back and check my record on that. So we have the Layman Brewster fight. So again, Vladimir Klitschko lost 2 fights as a heavyweight, top-tier heavyweight and a heavyweight champion. And he came back and dominated his era. So, and I would say for a decade, he dominated his era. So all is not lost for the Anthony Joshua fans listening to this broadcast, because it has been done before with Lennox Lewis losing twice in bad fashion, Vladimir Klitschko losing twice in bad fashion, and these guys were knocked out both fights, and Joshua losing in pretty bad fashion. So all is not lost. Remember, we're talking only 26 professional fights, so if he can get the right people in his corner, he can right the ship, he can pick up the pieces, he can win the rematch. Again, I would not be surprised if he won the rematch. Personally, I think he needs to throw to the body more, try to make land to Usyk's body instead of headhunting, and put a little bit more mustard on his punches, sit down on his punches, and not try to pot shot. So that'll be the strategy, I think, for him to win the fight. So his career is not lost. I'm not ready to write him off just yet. I gave you two all-time great heavyweights who had two bad losses and came back to dominate the division and really their era. So all's not lost. So this is Chin Check Radio. Until the next time, signing out.